Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just letting the people to enter right now. So just give us a few seconds and we'll start our program. Okay, let's start the program. People will continuously come in, but I'm Anthony Ford Jones, Director of Business Development for the HIA-LI, and welcome to the first of 3 technology series that Custom Computer Specialist is going to bring to us in 2021. Today is leading a remote workforce through the pandemic and beyond, which I can't think of a more timely subject right now that everyone is actually either struggling with or dealing with right now. But before we begin, I want to thank our board of directors. Their support every day for the history of the HIA-LI has been tremendous, especially their support through this whole COVID pandemic that we've gone through. Each one has stepped up and really helped us continue to do what we need to do and continue to bring you to programs like this through the whole pandemic. And I want to thank Custom Computer Specialists for being a sponsor of this program. Sponsors are very important to us. You know, sponsorship really helps us elevate our programs and helps us bring programs like this to you. And before we begin, let me just tell you about some upcoming events. We have on May 19th, we have Coach Dana from the championship New York Yankees. He was the conditioning coach for Derek Jeter and A-Rod and Mariano Rivera. I've seen him speak before. He is a wonderful person to see. If you have not signed up, I recommend you do. And then that will be followed on May 25th by Transformational Leadership Panel. The panel, as you can see, made up of David Kilmick and Paul Pachter and Kevin O'Connor, Richard Newman, Dave Freefield. It's just going to be an amazing time. And the last thing I want to mention, on June 10th, we are having a virtual job fair. You can contact me for more information, but this is something that is badly needed right now for all our members, just for the business community on Long Island and for the people that are out of work. So let's begin our program. So it's my pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the HIA-LI, Terry Elise Maselli.
Oh, thanks so much, Anthony. And good afternoon again, everyone. Hope you're staying Long Island strong. I know you are. And it's hard to believe it was over a year ago, right? This pandemic hit. And many of us thought it would be a 2-week blip, right? And now it's 14 months later. And we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the great news. I want to congratulate all of you, our members, because we watched all of you pivot quite quickly, right? And many of you repurposed to provide personal protection equipment. Many of you helped with guidance for our members, really in terms of access and getting access to well-needed capital. Know that the HIA-LI is here alongside you every single day fighting this fight. And again, we are so proud to have you as members. So, we've done a lot of surveying through the pandemic and several things have come back. You've all said to us how important access to capital is, obviously, how important a viable talent pool and really understanding how to get people and how to train people and how to hire people through this has been a struggle, a real struggle. And Anthony just alluded to, we're having a job fair on June 10th virtually for that reason. And the third thing is, you've talked a lot about technology. We all have, right? Because we had to very quickly pivot. Many of us working remote, many of us not knowing what this next norm will look at, but knowing that there are challenges of shift work and who's working from home and who's not. So as Anthony said a few minutes ago, this is so timely, this discussion. because we know that we're going to hear from some experts talk about what do you do in this remote marketplace? How do you create this culture, and what are some of the challenges and solutions that they're seeing? So I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne Mclaughlin. She is the Vice President and General Manager at Custom Computer Specialists. And I want to thank Greg Goldie, who's on our board, as well as Custom Computer Specialists again. So Suzanne, I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much. And I'd like to sincerely thank HIA for having us today. We really do appreciate that, and we're very excited to be here. So as Terry said, I am Suzanne Mclaughlin. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for Custom Computer Specialists. I've been with the company for 29 years, and I have experienced many things, which I'm sure all of you have, but this certainly is a first. So I will be leading the panel discussion today, and I'm very excited to be part of this with all of you. Today, we're going to be discussing how we lead a remote workforce and through the pandemic and beyond. We'll talk about what considerations we need to take into account, what the challenges are that we will be facing, and we'll hear from the panelists on what their recommendations are, and they'll be providing us some guidance as we work through this post-pandemic world that we're living in. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. To begin with, I'd like to introduce Andrew Garberino. He is of counsel with Ruskin, Moscow, and Falschek. Andrew has an extensive background working in both private and public sector. He's a member of the firm's health law department, as well as the white collar crime and investigations, not-for-profit, and cybersecurity and data privacy practice groups, which will be very helpful in this conversation today. Andrew, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today and be part of our panel.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Kyriako Kaimis. He is the Vice President and General Manager for the New York, New Jersey region of Custom. He has been with the company for over 25 years. He's a very accomplished technology executive, and he works with our clients to identify best-in-class solutions to make them successful. Kyriakos, thank you and welcome today. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Valerie Traverso. Valerie is the Director of Human Resources for Custom. She's been with us for over 22 years, and she's filled many different positions at Custom. We are very honored and happy to have her lead our human resources initiatives. So Valerie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
So as we're emerging out of the pandemic, I think it's pretty safe for all of us to say that many of the workforce models that we have been living with have changed. Whether we're looking at keeping our teams fully remote, or if we're looking to move to a hybrid work model, or just move everyone on site into our offices, there are some questions that are there before us. And we need to know how best to move forward through this post-pandemic world. So if we're looking at a hybrid workforce model, how do we ensure that everyone has the same experience? How do we have a successful video call and be sure everyone is engaged? How do we keep remote employees engaged and integrated with our on-premise employees? And what are the challenges that we have to face as our employees come back into the workforce? So we'll be talking about that this afternoon. So I'm very excited, so let's get started. So Andrew, I'm going to start with you today. I am sure as an attorney, you have seen your fair share of video call disasters. What tips can you share to have a successful video call, and what has your experience been?
So this is actually a really important topic, a really important question, specifically for attorneys. You know, for attorneys, time literally is money. You know, we set our prices based on our experience, but attorneys typically charge by the hour. And one of the things that was really critical to us was getting up to speed with video platforms, because wasting time because you're fiddling with the technology, it's just disastrous on multiple levels. You know, you can't charge a client for being frustrated because you can't log on to Zoom properly. So getting up to speed with the various platforms is critical, and just understanding why you're there, maintaining your sort of aura of professionalism is also really important. Making sure that you're in a room without other people. Again, that's critical to attorneys because of attorney-client communications and privilege and those things. But we've had instances where we're talking to a client over a video call, and we see people walking around in the background, and we have no idea who they are, what they can hear. So addressing those things in advance, taking care of those concerns at the outset is really important. When the pandemic hit, it took everybody by surprise. The court system, the government, and there was this mixture of platforms being used that just didn't really work initially. You had the New York State courts using Skype, which was a disaster at the beginning because it's not a terribly friendly interface when you've got lots of people that you need to segregate. You had the federal government using WebEx for a lot of calls, and when you have an attorney meeting with a government lawyer, and that government lawyer is spending 15 minutes to, in one case, an hour and a half literally trying to set up the features necessary to do the call, that's an extraordinary waste of time. And as far as professionalism, the worst disaster that I can think of, which was a fairly notorious event in Nassau, was during a court session, one of the foreign language interpreters showing up to the court session completely topless from the waist up. It was a man. It wasn't, we didn't have that issue, but he clearly didn't understand that people could see below his face. And it resulted in a very embarrassing string of emails that went out to the entire bar association and caused great personal embarrassment and a little bit of ridicule in the court. But just beyond that, just paying attention to how you look on camera. I have a colleague who just doesn't get, she's constantly looking down at an iPad, and the view is you're essentially just staring right up her nose the whole time. It's not a good look. They're awkward conversations to have with people when you're trying to correct that. So just that sort of familiarity and understanding what it is that you're doing with any particular platform. I'm sure Kyriakos can add to that. But those are really my high points on it.
Thank you, Andrew. Kyriakos, do you have anything to add?
Yes. So success to have a successful video call has been a challenge across the board, right? And there's many tools out there as well. And as a technology company, we have been trying to use, and we have been using different tools to communicate with employees. But with the last pandemic, it became a pivot point for a lot of companies where we're trying to enforce prior to that to use these tools. And the people that reject, especially the video, not so much the voice, the video to have that interaction with people. We saw a lot of challenges there prior to that, but now it's becoming more acceptable. However, with that, it become more challenged because now the people they force and be able to understand the technology that they're using, because like I said, there's many technologies out there. We have been using Cisco WebEx to name views, Zoom. Zooming became a word that now everybody's using. Let's Zoom. It's like Googling the same terminology. And I went home the other day, and my kids they say we have a Zoom meeting, and it's like it's happening across the board. But the point I'm trying to make there's so many tools that everybody's trying to use, and it's becoming challenged. How you using these tools and how you secure these tools, and where the people they're accessing, as Andrew said, pay attention to your surroundings, right? And the other day I was on the call with somebody, and they're having this call in their bedroom. And the husband works behind the lady, and again, undressed, not completely undressed, but it was undressed with the underwear. But that's something again that it makes it makes people to be cautious about what they are using, how they're using the tool. But the key there is to select the right tool, select the right platform, and then how do you educate all the users that you have to use and adapt to all these technologies that is out there, because it's not just one tool, it's multiple tools, and make sure that it's secure. So we're going to talk about that as well later on, but that's been a challenge for the people that whether we see them, how they get adapted. Even with that, the people that get refuse to use that technology, we see that as well in the schools. How do you keep the students engaged as well in the classrooms? It's not just the corporations, but how do you keep the students engaged in the classrooms and have that interaction, the personal touch. I think that's what we're trying to do here, is that with the pandemic, I think we lost that personal touch with people and feeling. And the video allows us to bring some of that. It still is not the same, but it allows us to bring some of that interaction. But you have to do it right. You have to secure it. You have to get people comfortable and be cautious how they use and educate how they're using these tools. So it's been a challenge, and again, it's been a pivot point for a lot of companies. But I think we, with the right education of the people, the right education of the users, as well, the IT, the people that they administrate that's a key as well, how they administrate that, and ensure that they provide secure video conferencing as we are right now. So there's a couple of things that we can talk about how to secure that as well. So
Kyriakos, to follow up on that, as we're integrating employees that are both in office and remote, how is the best approach? What is the best approach to use these video tools to make sure that they're integrated and they're communicating the way we need them to be?
So is I guess the first thing that we said to the people, and my advice is that let's select the platform that everybody agreed to use. That's the key, and educate them and use leverage the different features that are available. How people are going to come remote, how they get coming remote, how they dial into this WebEx or Zoom meetings or any platform that you would like to use, how these meetings are secure, and also 6 things that the people that have to watch, right, when they come into these meetings remote, right? Ensure that you create a dedicated meeting and it has an ID and password, right? You gotta have an ID and password in order to log into a particular meeting, right? A lot of groups prior to this pandemic, not everybody has that, but a lot of them, they do have right now key applications. They do have that where you go into a waiting room, right? So it doesn't allow people to join as they please. That's a key. There's conversations that happen that you can have that, and you don't want to open that meeting across everybody. You have to monitor who is coming to your meeting. And the way that you accomplish that is by having a waiting room. And the reason I'm saying that, you have to select a platform that has that feature, right? Ensure that you don't share the video links, even the recording. Right now we have the recording. Ensure that it goes secure to the audience that you want to send it, but also the video links, that the URLs that you send out there is not public available to everybody. It's only to the audience that you want to discuss that, right? Once they go into the waiting room, ensure that you monitor who is entering the room and who is exiting the room. Limit the screen share. The other thing that we do is we always like to share. And why I'm saying limit the screen share, you have somebody to administrate that, right? And by administrate that, in case that somebody forgets, and how often we share things and we forget to stop sharing, and all of a sudden we share some other private items, and that can be PHI items that you're not supposed to, can be healthcare, can be other things that you have on your screen, that you are not allowed to do that, all right? It's private information for either your employees or your clients. So make sure that you have somebody that is moderating the sharing of the screen. So those are some of the tips that we can leverage across the board and educate. It becomes an education of the people of how to use these tools. And that's how you have to select the right tool that provides these abilities and that has these features. Not every single application that is out there, because everybody has these applications. Everybody's coming with some kind of a video conference out, and just monitor and ensure that these features are, at least these critical features, they're available to your users.
That's great. Thank you, Kyriakos. Andrew, while we're on the topic of the video platform, I am sure as an attorney, you hear from many other fellow attorneys and from your clients that they don't trust the video platform. From your experience, how secure do you think these platforms are? Should we be concerned? And how do you respond to these questions?
So it's a good question. It harkens back to what I started with, having some degree of familiarity with whatever platform you're going to be using, and also understanding the purpose behind a particular video conference. there are certain platforms that just lend themselves better to certain types of meetings. But to your point, to answer your question, look, I do work with an attorney from time to time who refuses to trust any video platform, based on some of the horror stories that were coming out, what they were calling Zoom bombing a year ago, where you could kind of trace that back to a Zoom password or a meeting password just being published to anybody who took the time to look for it. And you have all of these ne'er-do-wells kind of signing on and sharing their screen, similar to what Kyriakos was saying, and doing terrible, terrible things, particularly involving school board meetings for some reason. But having that degree of familiarity, would, I think, prevent some folks from being uncomfortable. This one particular attorney will call in to any video conference. They will not deal with any of the platforms because they're afraid that they're going to give up too much access to whatever device they're using, and it can really be counterproductive because when you have to have a meeting, particularly with a client or a customer, where you've got to share information, doing it by emailing documents and following up with a call, it's just not quite as convenient as sharing the document on your screen and kind of going through things point by point, so there's no confusion. It's the equivalent of a sit-down meeting. So in terms of platforms that I prefer, for what I would call a regular video conference, nothing all too terrible happening, I do like Zoom. It's convenient. It's very user-friendly. It's something that you can walk somebody through, particularly older folks who don't consider themselves terribly literate from a technology perspective. I think Teams is a fine platform, and just paying attention to the security. If you've got a question about a platform, speak to, I imagine that most of you either have internal IT folks or an outsourced IT team. Talk to them about what you can do to maintain security and prevent things that you might be worried about.
Excellent, thank you. And Andrew, I have a follow-up question from the audience. From a legal perspective, should we refrain from recording video interviews?
That's a loaded question.
It is. What do you think?
I'm actually, I was just talking to a colleague of mine here. We need to bring the CEO of a client to an interview with government attorneys, and we want to record it for a variety of reasons. So there are reasons for, there are reasons against. We may want to record it, I should say. We haven't come to any conclusions. Listen, if there's a recording, that's good evidence, right? So it really depends on what's going to take place. There are certainly certain conversations that you don't want documented. And that doesn't mean that there's anything nefarious going on. You just don't want them documented, and you certainly don't want certain things disclosed. If you're going to be having a video conference with a board of directors where they're going to start discussing acquiring a company, that's probably not something you want to record just in case it gets out there. That's going to be something that's dangerous to get out there.
Right.
You could get the SEC, very, very actively involved in reviewing that video and trying to figure out who published it and why it was published. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. Something like this is fine to record, I would think. And there's a purpose behind it. It's designed to get it out to the HIA's membership, which is, I think, a worthy goal. But really sensitive conversations. I'll say what I tell to my clients. Why? Just ask yourself why. Is there a real reason to do it? And even if there's a real reason, can you just take notes? And have somebody dedicated to take good notes. That's a perfectly valid way of recording what happens in a meeting. So there's no hard and fast answer to that as far as I'm concerned, but it requires some thought. If somebody wants to ask that, it's something that I think would require a little bit of thought.
Okay. And Andrew, I assume you would have to notify all participants on this video call that is being recorded prior to starting the recording.
You know what? I don't think you do.
Okay.
From a legal, I think it's a good thing to do. I think it's the proper thing to do. New York is a state, and I don't think that the rules are different for video, but in New York, if you're a party to a phone call, you can record that call without somebody's knowledge or consent. If you're part of a conversation, participating in a conversation, you can record that conversation legally without that other person's consent. It's situations where it kind of becomes, well, I shouldn't say kind of, where it becomes problematic is when you have somebody recording something who's not an active participant. That's when you kind of need everybody's knowledge and consent about that. But I don't believe that there's a legal requirement to notify people that something's being recorded. I just think it's the right thing to do, though. So
Absolutely. Now, suppose it's a one-on-one. Does that make a difference if it's just two people in a conversation?
No.
No.
In New York, New York is what's called a one-party state. So in New York, any party of a conversation, whether it's by phone or a face-to-face conversation, is entitled to record that conversation. But again, I just think it's the right thing to do to just let somebody know. Some states, do require consent. Florida, for example, everybody has to know that a conversation is being recorded. That's not the case in New York.
Very interesting. Thank you, Andrew, for that. Thank you.
Anytime.
I have a question for all the panelists, and the question is, has any company successfully used a media training company that talks towards how employees look and sound on camera, not the technology, but how to use the camera angle, microphone, perhaps the backgrounds, to give them better training on, how do you really work with video?
I mean, like I can just say, so I can finish talking and let other people talk. I know that it exists. That's not something that I believe we've engaged in. They're sort of informal conversations that we've had. It's probably a little bit different for us because, just the line of work that we're in as lawyers, there's sort of an expectation that we look and behave professionally, and it's internalized. But that is something that's happening out there that I'm aware of. There are folks that are going out there, and it's worthwhile, I think. And again, it's on a case by case, company by company basis, but I think it is a worthwhile thing to consider.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
To add to that, and when it comes to education, Sue, there is professional services, and we're working with some of those companies that they offer specific training, not just for the teachers, but also for the students, how they can conduct that training to get the best out of these video conference or video classrooms, and how to administer the classrooms, and how you can administer the entire K through 12 or including higher education universities, how to conduct those classes. But the same thing can apply to the corporate world because they're using the same tools today. So, but there is professional services out there. I agree with Andrew, and we're working with a couple of those companies that they can offer those services to any that might be interested.
Thank you, Kyriakos. I appreciate that. Valerie, let's turn to you. So Val, as business leaders, we have a number of considerations we need to take into account when we're preparing for a hybrid work model. And as a result, I have a few questions for you. So first, how would you suggest keeping remote workers energized?
Yeah, as much as we're all getting used to working remotely and relying on video conferencing and email, it just doesn't replicate the impact that leadership could have when you're working with your staff live. So we found it helpful to make sure you schedule regular meetings with remote workers to check in and see how their challenges and successes are going. Try to get a feeling for if they are challenged, if they could use a little bit more assistance and a little bit more attention. If you check in often, you'll be able to coach them on how to adapt and thrive in a remote environment. You'll find that many employees are doing very well and they are thriving, and then you can leverage them to share their habits and routines with others so that their peers could be as successful too. Stay aligned with goals and objectives too. I think setting clear expectations can really help those remote employees stay focused on what's most important, what matters the most. I would also recognize employees both publicly and privately for those that meet or exceed their goals so that they stay motivated and appreciated. At the end of the day, the employee still wants to be seen. They still want to be recognized. And I would consider wrapping a discipline around start and end times. I think it's very easy to find yourself always on, and the lines can get blurry on when there's a start and an end time, which will lead to burnout for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Valerie. Valerie, following up on this discussion about remote working, what suggestions would you have for maintaining professionalism while working from home? What would you suggest to all of our remote workers?
Yeah, so we all have the best intentions. It's very easy, though, when you're working from home to start getting a bit too comfortable and leaning over to a more casual side over time. So one of the things that the company itself could do is put out a policy that really sets expectations of what you're expecting from your employees so that it's clear to them. Employees are expected to work during normal working hours. We're servicing clients during a certain period. There's support staff that has to serve the client-facing staff. So everybody needs to make sure that they're available during their working hours. They should also have a quiet, dedicated workspace, even if it is just the dining room table. At least it should be free from distraction, right? So for the employee and for whoever the recipient could be on the other end of the video or at the other end of the call, employees should make a commitment to reduce noise, even if it's a TV or a television in the room or coming from a different room. Sometimes there's a lawnmower. So use your mute button. If you're not speaking, use the mute button just for the courtesy of everybody else on the call, because that feedback can be disruptive to a meeting. And maintain a professional appearance, a professional presentation. Work attire can be casual to a point, but you still want to make sure it's appropriate for meeting with work colleagues and your clients. But aside from any kind of policy or agreement, I think managers, and this goes back to what Andrew was saying before, I think we can help each other. Maybe as a peer, call somebody out offline, privately, and maybe just let them know that people don't always know how they appear over video or how they're being received over a microphone, or may not realize that people can see what's behind them on the video screen.
Valerie, let me ask you a follow-up question to that. So for our on-premise workers that are working in the office, we have a defined dress code. There is an expectation on conduct when you're in the office. Can we as business leaders also extend that out to the remote workers? Can we have a defined dress code and code of conduct that we expect for our employees to be working remotely? That may include, you need to be in a quiet room. There can't be anyone else in the room with you, especially if we're talking about anything confidential, especially in the world of legal. Is that something that businesses can do?
We could publish a policy. I would look to Andrew to answer that for legal reasons, but we could publish a policy so that we're setting expectations and setting guidelines for our own employees to follow.
Andrew, is there anything you can add to that? Any legal concerns that an organization would have by doing that?
I mean, like what I started with is the reason I started with it is because it's so important. One of the things that you hire a lawyer for, and I know that this is relevant particularly to legal work, but one of the reasons you hire an attorney is to maintain privilege. A conversation that you have one-on-one, between a client and an attorney, that's sacrosanct. Nobody can force the attorney or the other party to that conversation to divulge what was said during that conversation. That's critical. But that can be waived, and it can be waived by the presence of other people. And that's why it gets so concerning if you see somebody walking around, even if it's a spouse, or we've seen things where you have shadows on a wall behind somebody. It's clearly folks that are moving somewhere, and you always have to kind of make that inquiry. So I think it is important to have a policy. I think it is important to be upfront about that. Those growing pains, we've kind of gotten through those over the last months. And that's something that I'll ask somebody up front when I'm getting into a meeting with them. In terms of requiring, certain circumstances at home, it gets tricky, right? My kids were home for a very long time, doing school remotely. And we thankfully had space where if I was at home, I could, I could get myself somewhere and have a private conversation with a client. It gets difficult because it's really hard to legislate what happens inside a person's home. But I do think policies about work are relevant, they're necessary, but they're also difficult. They're difficult to deal with. They're especially difficult on the island right now. There really is an HR crisis on Long Island right now. There's a lack of HR professionals. I'm aware of several companies that are just missing one. A couple of them are desperate to find one, and they're not really out there right now. So it's all the more problematic. In terms of dress code and things like that, I'll leave that up to a company by company thing. But I do think it's reasonable to say if you're going to be on video somewhere, dress appropriately. Don't be in your pajamas. It's just not a good look. If nothing else, even if they're not facing customers or clients, it's just not a good look. And I think that that's a very reasonable thing to put on an employee.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Andrew. I have a follow-up question for the full panel. And this question is, I'm working from home full time. I have childcare for my 2 sons and my daughter once she gets home from school. As much as I aim to have quiet space, it can be very difficult, which we all understand that, having children. In your experience, are you finding that companies are flexible with working parents? Any feedback from the panel?
Yeah,
You can go ahead, Andrew, go ahead.
in my experience, yes. I haven't, and look, I don't always hear terrible things, but one of the things, at least in our office, we really came together after the pandemic hit. And that's something, and I'm not trying to plug where I work right now, but it's one of the things that I genuinely like is we do genuinely try to take care of each other here. And I think that that's been the case from what I've heard from other people. And look, one of the things that was kind of a shock that I found out during a different HIA program not so long ago, that there are companies that have found that certain employees are more productive when they work from home. And that's been a bit of a revelation. So I think that there's a bit of an understanding that life has just been a little bit different. Hopefully we're kind of getting out of this and it's not going to be as much of a problem. But from what I've seen and what I've heard, most companies have been very understanding about the circumstances that the individual employees have to deal with, because that's the one universal thing about the pandemic, is that it really did affect everybody, and everybody has their own set of issues that they have to deal with as far as this goes.
Andrew, while we're talking about that, I have a question. How would you suggest handling an employee that does not want to return back to the office?
It's a really hard question to answer. Let me start with, there's no legal right to work from home. Okay. Especially if it's somebody who's, especially if it's a business where people in the office are essential. If there are certain jobs where you just can't work from home. There's just no real way to do it. So I do think it's important to handle on an individualized basis. But you also have to be mindful that you don't want to create issues with other employees. You're going to make an allowance for this person, and then 15 other people want to take advantage of that. And you've also got to consider productivity. Like I said, there have been some companies that I know of where specific employees just worked better from home for whatever reason. They got themselves locked in, got their work done, were working better and more efficiently for whatever reason. So those, it's sort of an equation that you have to consider. But there's no legal right to work from home. and it's really more of a business decision, I would think, on an employee by employee basis.
Andrew, follow-up question. Going forward, can a company require an employee to come to the office if there's work that they can do remotely?
In short, yes. That is, like I said, there's no right to work from home. So as of this moment, a company can require, so long as they're complying with applicable guidelines about, capacity and things like that, which, they do, a year ago, they were changing on an hourly basis. It's, 50% in the office, 25% in the office. As long as that's being complied with, a company can require an employee to be in the office. Yes.
Let me ask this follow-up question, Andrew. You have 2 employees. They have similar roles. They perform similar tasks. One of those employees works much more efficiently and effectively remotely than the other employee. So you allow this first employee to work remotely. Are you required to let the second employee work remotely if you know that that person is not as productive and efficient than that individual could be if that person was in the office?
See, this is where things start to get tricky.
Mhm.
So, you really need to be mindful about setting universal rules. Okay, and that's really important. You don't want to be in a situation where you're treating certain employees differently, again, on an individualized basis. And you're not going to be treating other people similarly. It gives rise to problems. It gives rise to complaints, perhaps litigation. So again, it's one of those things that really has to be considered, the way you're going to go about it. If somebody needs a true accommodation, that's something to be considered, certainly. But if you're going to make special rules for certain employees, that never ends well. I would encourage anybody contemplating that to have a real discussion with their HR department, perhaps discuss that with counsel. Those are the sorts of things that can really divide a workplace. And even if they don't lead to active litigation or anything like that, it can just become a disaster within a company.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Andrew. Valerie, we have a follow-up question for you. As businesses are reopening and more remote employees are starting to come back into the office, what is the best way to re-onboard these remote workers into the office environment?
Well, if it's just onboarding right back into the office environment, it's your standard onboarding procedures. You just go right through the process again, and you get them reacquainted with the company tools and that are available to them at their desk side. If you were considering how to onboard people who are remote, that could be a little bit of a different process when you're onboarding people that have to work remotely, because you want them to understand their roles and responsibilities, but you also want them to get off to a good start with the immediate team, which doesn't always happen as easily if they're not in the office working directly side by side with people. So some of the things that we do is we make sure that they have access to the collaboration and video conferencing tools. And as Kyriakos mentioned earlier, we make sure that training is all part of orientation, because that training just commits or shows the organization's commitment to providing tools that are necessary for the employees to succeed, whether they're here in the building or whether they're working remotely, or if it's a hybrid team combined with both. It's also helpful to have the onboarding goals. 30, 60, 90-day expectations, whether you're remote or in the office. Those things, clarity around what your objectives are is still important. And communicating with employees, no matter where they're located, is key. That's going to make the difference.
Do you feel, this is a follow-up question that just popped in my head, so I apologize listening to you. Do you feel as though there needs to be a different or an altered performance evaluation process for employees that are working remotely versus ones that are working in the office?
So we have not changed our performance management process or our evaluation process for those that are remote. I think that it should stay consistent, in my opinion. I think it should be consistent, but I haven't really explored it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Valerie. Andrew, I have a question for you. So I am sure many business leaders are trying to understand the legal ramifications of the vaccination process. So let's talk about the vaccines as it relates to their business. Is it legal to mandate an employee to get vaccinated in order for them to return to the office?
You're asking very good questions.
Thank you.
And this is a complicated question. So an employee, the way you phrased it, an employee, no. All employees, yes. And I want to be clear here. This is a very, very fluid situation. This could change on Monday for all I know. As of right now, from a federal standpoint, the EEOC says yes. If it's a universal vaccination policy, the EEOC says yes. There's even some language that terminating or not hiring somebody who refuses to get vaccinated is also okay from a legal standpoint. That's the federal standard. Some states disagree. Hawaii disagrees, Montana disagrees. But as of right now in New York, if you've got a universal policy for all employees, that's acceptable. It has to have the appropriate carve-outs for, somebody who's going to object on religious grounds or their own health, somebody with a compromised immune system who can't be vaccinated. There have to be those carve-outs. So those have to exist for the policy to be proper, but it can't be just, I think most of us have been vaccinated, but Joe over there hasn't. We're going to make Joe go get vaccinated. That's improper. Joe can sue you for that. It's got to be, again, kind of hearkening back to what we were talking about a little bit ago. It's got to be a universal thing right now. But again, I want to stress this. It's a very fluid, set of law and regulation right now. It could change. So that's the type of thing, again, if you're going to be doing that, it's really worth running that by counsel or having an HR professional in-house who can do that research quickly and find out what the state of things are right now. Incentive programs are also totally fine, as far as I know, at least in New York. You can incentivize the vaccinations. I have to say I was a little bit surprised when I learned about this. It's something that's actually come up a couple of times in this last week, believe it or not. But the EEOC says, yes, a company can mandate that all of its employees be vaccinated, especially if they're in positions where they need to deal with the public and things like that.
Andrew, what does a company do if they want to mandate to have all their employees get vaccinated, but they may have one or two employees that cannot get vaccinated due to medical reasons?
Well, that the policy has to have that carve out in it. So
Okay.
It's that's critical. It can't just be no matter what, we're forcing you to get the vaccine. No, if there's a valid medical reason or the certain religious observations that would lead somebody to object to being vaccinated, those need to be placed within that protocol, whatever the company is going to come up with.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you so much, Andrew. Follow-up question. So same question. Can a corporation or a business, can they mandate all employees wear masks?
As far as I know, yes. Yes.
So even if a person's fully vaccinated, it can still be required that they wear a mask.
Yeah, and again, I think you need to look at the guidance on that. And once again, this is also a very fluid situation. But right now, the current guidelines, even for folks who've been vaccinated, the guidelines are still to wear a mask in public. If you're in a big office with hundreds of people in it, I know a lot of us are. Yes, a company can require that somebody wear a mask. I'm in my office with the door closed. We do have a mask policy in my office. I'm allowed to take my mask off here. It's something that companies are doing, and as far as I know, it is still legal to do so.
Okay, so let me just follow up. I want to make sure I understand. Let's suppose I have an employee that is not vaccinated. Can I say, okay, if you're not going to be vaccinated, then you need to wear a mask?
Well, I don't think you even need to get to the if you're not going to be vaccinated point. I think you can require all employees to wear masks. If you're getting to a point where you're lifting the mask rule for whatever reason, but you want a particular person to wear a mask, that again, that kind of toes the line
Okay.
into treating somebody differently, which is always problematic.
Okay. So you could not have a policy that says if you're vaccinated, you do not have to wear a mask. If you're not vaccinated, you need to wear a mask.
I think you need to look at the guidance, and if you're following the guidance, the CDC guidance. As of right now, it's still the guidance that's out there as of today, as far as I know, still maintains wear a mask even if you're vaccinated, unless you're under certain circumstances that I don't know will necessarily apply to any given office.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions for the panel? Any closing thoughts that the panel has for our attendees?
Just to add into that, to what we have been discussing the last hour is that we're talking about remote workers, how we bring the remote workers into the workforce and ensure they have the proper tools and ensure that they can access the files. Something that we underestimate is the cybersecurity. We underestimate how that is can affect and what the implication would be. Everybody's working from home. The majority of us that have internet right now, the cable files coming from schools, coming from our houses, and those devices, they're unsecure. The majority of us that don't take the security precautions as that we do in corporations, something that we have to pay attention to that. And I think we'll have a following discussion in a few weeks that we're going to be talking how you secure the environment coming remotely, right? So that's something that everybody has to pay attention, something that would underestimate. We share bandwidths with our kids, we share devices. All the remote work that will come in the video is how where it's coming from, where it's originate. Remember, there's bad actors out there waiting, and they're looking for the weak links in order to break in. And now the weak links becomes our houses, our homes, and especially our kids that they use any tool that's out there. They download so many apps. Just simple example, everybody has a Nest, everybody has a Ring in their house, everybody has an Alexa. So all the devices, they generate problems, because I will tell you a quick story about somebody that had Alexa, and I will drop there. A lady installed an Alexa's house, but also had electronic lock in their houses. So a guy went outside that they wanted to break into the house, and it was simple as calling Alexa, open the door, and the door opened. Simple as that. Because that's how the people they program, trying to make it easy. But at the same time, they broke into the house and they stole everything that she had in the house. And nobody caught them, right? But that's the stuff that we have to watch from a cybersecurity to ensure that all these tools that we provide to our users, they're secure, and don't underestimate that somebody they are waiting for something to break in, either to your house, but either to your corporation, and get that information. So.
Thank you, Kyriakos. Well, at this point, I would like to thank Andrew, Kyriakos, and Valerie for their time, their feedback, and their thought leadership as we're moving through this very volatile time of integrating our remote and our on-premise employees and working with our remote workforce. And I would also like to thank HIA again for having us and sharing the time. I do hope that this was helpful. So at this point, I will turn it back over to you, Anthony. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank the panel. This was definitely a worthwhile program to listen to and get everyone's views from a legal perspective, from a technology perspective, from an HR perspective. So I want to thank the entire Custom Computer Specialist team, and also Andrew from Ruskin for really putting together a wonderful program. I also want to thank all the attendees who Zoomed in today to see this webinar. So once again, I'm wishing everyone a wonderful weekend, and thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Have a good
Okay.
weekend. Take
You
care.
too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.